Joe Biden has had a lot of what they call gaffes throughout his whole entire presidency, but never this bad. To give a little context to the clip I'm about to show, he started out his speech with how all doctors and nurses are going to heaven, which is good, but then gets into a personal story about his experience with a doctor.
Named Pearl Nelson, military. She'd come in and do things that I don't think you learn in medical school, nursing school. She'd whisper in my ear. I couldn't understand her. She'd whisper, she'd lean down. She'd actually breathe on me to make sure that there was a connection, a human connection.
This is very, very creepy, and I didn't know that blowing into somebody's ear was forming a human connection, but you know, Joe Biden has some weird kinks. My name is Demetrios Araujo, and you're watching the Demetrios Araujo Show. Moving right in, we have an article from CNN, why Trump is a clear favorite for the 2024 GOP nomination. Now, based off of just the headline, we can just say CNN is just not going to give this objective truth at all. It's just going to have a one-sided partisan take on it like CNN usually does. And as for this, I don't really know if Trump is completely the favorite. I mean, if you were to look at the polling, Ron DeSantis is coming up on top, and especially the younger generation. The older generation, Trump still got them on lock. But, you know, one bad move from Trump, and that's all done. The house of cards was going to fall on top of him. But, you know, we don't even know if Ron DeSantis is even running. Most likely he will, but he has not announced his candidacy yet. So we will see what that brings. Moving with the article, conservatives across the nation are in Washington, D.C. area this weekend for the annual Conservative Political Action Conference. Some potential 2024 Republican presidential contenders, such as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, have been noticeably absent. But former President Donald Trump will speak at the conference on Saturday, and he comes in a wave of momentum in the polls. Trump is a clear, though not prohibitive, favorite to win next year's Republican nomination for president. Right now, he's averaging about 44% in the national primary polls, which, of course, we can't trust polls because we know what happens with the polls. It would conduct the poll, and then in the middle of the night, thousands and thousands of results will come in, and boom, they don't know what happened, and then a pipe will burst down the way. Oh yeah, we can't trust these polls at all. He's 15 points ahead of DeSantis, who is at 29%. A 15-point lead may not seem impressive at the early stage of the primary campaign, but it's notable for two reasons. The first is that most candidates in Trump's position right now have gone on to win their primary. Take a look at all the candidates who are averaging at least 35% in the last national primary polls. In the last half of the year prior to the primary, example, January to June of 2018 for the 2020 primary, since 1972, about 75% of these candidates have gone on to win the nomination when they face at least one major challenger. Those polling between 35% and 50% at this stage of the primary campaign have won about 67% of the time. It would be easy to discuss Trump's numbers as merely the product of high name recognition, but history suggests something different. The eventual nominees from this group include, among others, President Garland Ford for 1976, Vice President George W. Bush for 1988, the Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole for 1996. It turns out that the name recognition is important to winning nominations and will likely be the strength for Trump, not a weakness. In other words, Trump's current standing in the polls is statistically relevant, even though it is early. Candidates in DeSantis' position haven't been nearly as successful. Those polling between 20 and 35% have gone on to win their party nods about 40% of the time since 1972, a polling recovery. The second reason Trump's advantage over DeSantis is notable is that it's growing. This is a change from where we had been much of last year. Trump was especially struggling following Republicans' underwhelming performance in the last fall's midterm elections. His once 40-point lead over DeSantis declined to 10 points on average over the latter half of November through December. Trump's share of the GOP support went from north of 50% to about 40%. The reason was pretty clear. Much was to blame for the GOP's historical midterm underperformance for an opposition party was led by at Trump's feet. Many candidates he supported, including those who backed the falsehood that the 2020 election was a legitimate, lost winnable races. Okay, so we already know that a lot of things happened in the 2020 election, and I can't really say a lot because YouTube will block me and ban me and copyright strike me, but there's some fish swimming in that water, to say it lightly. So we're not going to talk about that anymore. We're going to drop that. But moving with this idea still, right? You are just completely just running over the fact that something could have happened. Something did happen. We don't want to say on YouTube because YouTube doesn't really like that stuff. But, we do know some fish was swimming in the water, and the water did smell kind of fishy on November 8th, 2020. But, it's okay. It's okay. We're not going to ask some questions. We're not going to ask any questions. But CNN is completely just ignoring the facts. But we already knew this. Moving on to the next CNN article, we actually have Biden's first ever veto might be against the GOP war on woke capitalism. Wow. You see, I just can't picture Joe Biden signing against a bill. He signed 50 bills that were on his desk without reading any of them. He didn't even know what he was signing. He's like, gotta sign this one. Gotta sign this one, gotta sign this one, gotta sign this one. No, there's no way he's going to stamp the veto sign on it and make them go back to the drawing board. No, I just cannot picture this happening. Moving with the article, Joe Biden could end up wielding his first veto of presidency not on one of the great issues of the state, but over a wonky skirmish sparked by Republican Party assault on its culture warriors brand as woke capitalism. Congress has sent to his desk a resolution overturning a Labor Department rule that allows managers of retirement funds to consider environmental and or other factors when picking investments. The measure passed the Democratic-controlled Senate on Wednesday with the votes of all Republicans and 2 vulnerable Democrats. And now Biden has vowed to block it. See, the thing is that he can vow to do anything, but the day after, he's going to forget what he said the day prior. So it's like he doesn't really know what he's saying because he's just going to forget it a couple minutes down the road. The showdown might seem obscure, but it's a barometer of the kind of cultural backlash agenda that is certain to shape the tense politics for the next 2 years in divided Washington, and the Republican primary is the run-up to the 2024 presidential election. This strategy is the latest front in the Republican Party's self-described war on woke. In other words, their efforts to attack some climate change and social or racial equality policies that they believe will fire up their most conservative voters, many of whom fear their vision of America is under attack. The GOP is trying to define the next few years as a struggle between normal or crazy. It literally is. Some people in the political party, Democrats, want to chop off the private body parts of a healthy young man to make them a woman or a quote woman, because guys simply cannot be a woman. We're not going to talk about that. It's just common sense. And they want to chop a perfectly healthy breast off of a girl to make them seem more like a man. That's crazy. And that's why they're saying it's good versus evil in this election cycle. Continuing, the resolution Congress passed also shows how the GOP is increasingly unmoored from its role as the party corporate America and Wall Street as it seeks to weaponize the cultural anxieties for its most committed voters in red states. Investment firms had around $1 trillion in its so-called environmental, social, and government assets in 2021, according to the PwC, which allow fund managers to make investing decisions based on such non-financial considerations. The GOP's assault on socially conscious corporations is being pioneered by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a likely 2024 contender who this week escalated his clash with Walt Disney Company over its criticism of one of his laws that limits certain classroom instruction about sexual orientation and gender identity for young children. The fact that anti-ESG measure has made it to Biden's desk at all is one of the first illustrations of the delicate power balance in Washington, given the new Republican majority in the House and the still fragile Democratic edge in the Senate. It passed the Senate by 50-46 on Wednesday, with Democrats hurt by the absence of Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman, who was hospitalized for depression. Okay, so we're going to stop you right there. You're saying that he's hospitalized for depression, but also on the front page of CNN this morning, we had John Fetterman signing a bill to sue the Ohio South Bend. No, that's South Bend, Indiana. We have John Fetterman signing legislation to actually sue Ohio for the train derailment. So are you in the hospital, or like what's going on here? Is somebody else doing your job for you? Because that's most likely the case in this situation. Moving with the next article, we actually have an MSNBC article. We have Ron DeSantis' new book is a gift to his opponents. Wow. Why is it a gift? He's not giving that for free. His opponents in the 2024 presidential race can learn much from who's missing from the courage to be free. So moving with the article, Ron DeSantis is one of the most prominent Republican leaders skipping this year's Conservative Political Action Conference. Perhaps the Florida governor is choosing instead to prepare for his upcoming visits to the key primary states as part of an unofficial tour for his new book, which has the desperately generic titled "The Courage to Be Free." While DeSantis' absence from the CPAC has made headlines, what's absent from his book is far more telling. For a man who likes to pick his fights, the one DeSantis avoids in his book are signposts for Democrats looking for weaknesses. The least surprising omissions are the ones even DeSantis would probably recognize as politically inconvenient. For example, though he rails against elites helping elites, he doesn't mention that he's appointed some 250 donors to political posts. He does not repeat his tweet that voting is a privilege, not a right. So they go farther in saying that a tweet he claims he didn't write. Okay, so if he claims he didn't write something, so what's the case here? If he says that he didn't write it, then he didn't write it. If he posted it on his Twitter, then that's a different story. Now, here's the thing, though. I completely agree. Voting is a privilege. It's not a right. It can be taken away from you. If you are a criminal in jail for killing somebody or raping somebody or doing something horribly evil to somebody else, you will lose your right immediately to vote. That's it. You ruined your chance. That's for citizens. You're not a citizen. You're a prisoner. You're in a different class of people. If you rape somebody, kill somebody, double homicide, whatever the hell, and that's above and beyond, we know what's above and beyond. If you kill somebody, not just running a red light or speeding, that's not what we're talking about. If you get caught with weed, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the big stuff, the stuff that you go to prison for. You don't go to prison for weed. You go to jail for weed. Moving on with the article, oddly, given DeSantis' obvious ambitions toward the Oval Office, foreign policy is almost absent from the book. It's not as if print space was tight. DeSantis spends dozens of pages attacking critical race theory and crowing about a showdown with 60 Minutes about Florida's vaccine distribution. But Ukraine is never mentioned. China gets 2 pages and Russia is only named in the context of the investigations into Donald Trump. Even when DeSantis recounts his efforts as a congressman to move the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, his only takeaway is that the so-called experts who opposed him were wrong. The definitions of elite and expert shift throughout DeSantis' book, with the only consistent factor being people who disagree with him. Not only is there a sign in this book of a DeSantis doctrine, there's barely sense of that he's thought about foreign policy at all. Yes, because he's governor. And that's the thing. You're taking a risk when you elect a governor because they don't have any foreign policy. They have no track record for any foreign policy. So welcome to the same exact road that we've been on, MSNBC. I'm glad you joined the party. Moving on with the next article from MSNBC, we have Rick Scott takes his fight against Mitch McConnell to a new level. Rick Scott has taken plenty of rhetorical shots at Mitch McConnell, but at CPAC, the Floridian threw fuel on the burning fire of contempt. It was tempting to think that once the post-election drama subsided, the Republican officials started to resolve their intra-party differences. Senator Rick Scott would start to focus less attention on Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and more on governing, especially with his 2024 re-election campaign coming up. But those assuming the feud would soon fade were mistaken. As Roll Call reported, those watching the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, received a timely reminder about their divisions yesterday. Scott took aim at his fellow Republicans. While he did not cite Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell by name, he criticized establishment Republicans that he said have reportedly capitulated to Democrats. It's not just the Democrats in Washington who are destroying our country, the senator said. You've heard the famous quote, "We've met the enemy and he is us." Unfortunately, some of the leaders of our own Republican establishment, they've been in Washington for way too long, and they forget why they came there. They've gotten used to caving into the Democrats. The idea that Mitch McConnell is contributing to the destruction of the United States and Scott sees him as an enemy represents a new rhetorical escalation from this far-right Floridian. And far-right is anyone more right than Hillary Clinton. So that's far-right for MSNBC. Moving on to the next article from NPR, we have a United States federal agency is suing ExxonMobil after 5 nooses were found at a Louisiana complex. And see, the thing is that at complexes and, workspaces, and if you have like construction going on, so construction zones, you will see ropes put down or hung up in all different configurations, knotted in all different ways. Maybe you'll see the bow tie, maybe you'll see the double knot, or maybe you'll see like the noose tie. It's not because we want to hang or they want to hang somebody. It's simply because they just want to hang an object. They want to hang, I don't know, something like this, a charger. It's a construction zone. Get the hell out of the construction zone if you don't know what the hell you're talking about. The United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a federal agency, said it was suing ExxonMobil after several nooses were discovered at the company's complex in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The EEOC said ExxonMobil feared to take action after a black employee discovered a noose at his workstation at the chemical plant in January 2020. At this time, it was the 4th noose uncovered at the Baton Rouge site, and a 5th was found at the end of the year. ExxonMobil allegedly investigated some, but not all, of the prior incidents and failed to take measures responsibility calculated to the end of the harassment, which resulted in a racially hostile work environment, according to the EEOC's statement on Thursday. Okay, so I'm going to stop you right there. You see a knot hanging, and you just assume that somebody just wants to kill you. Like, we're taking a huge leap, okay? You need to stop jumping to conclusions because you don't even know why that knot was there in the very first place. It's not to hang you. No. You're going to break the rope. Come on now. Democratic Hispanic Caucus takes aim at the Biden administration's border moves. Moving on to the next article from Fox News, as left-wing backlash builds. So, Democrats in the Congressional Hispanic Caucus took aim this week at the Biden administration's recently announced measures to get control of the overwhelming migrant crisis at the southern border, making the latest criticism from the administration's left flank. Rep. Aldrino Asperella, Democrat from New York, said in a press conference on Thursday that the caucus has expressed some concerns regarding the recent policies that have been put in place by the administration. In January, the administration announced that a humanitarian patrol program for Nigerians, Cubans, Haitians, and Venezuelans, which allows 30,000 migrants in a month if they meet certain conditions, including having a sponsor in the United States and passing background checks. Good, because we can't just we can't just tell all these people, come in. We have no houses for them. We have no money for them. They have no jobs. We don't even have any jobs. So how are they supposed to get jobs? It just does not make any sense. Moving on to the next article from Fox News, we actually have Jill Biden dismisses Nikki Haley's proposal for a mental competency test. So, of course, Jill Biden does not want Joe Biden, her husband, the president of the United States, to take a mental competency test at all, because we know Joe Biden just wants to talk about his chocolate chip ice cream and lick it and talk about corn pop and talk about what he did in the Senate and forget what he did when he was at home in the morning making breakfast. Forget about that. Forget about practically his whole entire life. We forget about that too. It's a sad thing, and we don't want the president of the United States to be looking very weak, as what Joe Biden looks like. First, moving with the article, First Lady Jill Biden dismissed statements made by Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley, who called for politicians over the age of 35 to undergo mental competency tests. According to the reports, CNN reported that in an interview set to air on the network on Monday night, the First Lady called the proposal ridiculous, and when asked if the president would consider taking a mental competency test if elected, she said, "We will never discuss anything like that." So you're offended now. So you don't want your husband to take a mental competency test to be the United States president. But, of course, your husband, Joe Biden, has no idea where he even is. Moving on to the next article from the Daily Wire, we actually have Manchin balks on endorsing Biden, teases political decision. So if you do not already know, Joe Manchin, he's the most conservative liberal. Now, that's not saying much, but he does have a thinking brain inside of his skull, and that's a lot better than what most of these Democrats have at this point. Now, people have asked him if he was running for president of the United States, and he's like, "Ooh, I don't want to make a political decision. Ooh, I don't know." And then he would just dodge the question fully. He wouldn't actually answer it. So, with that being said, we can go off on a limb and say that he is running for president of the United States, but we don't know that for sure. But by the looks of it, he is. Moving with the article, Democrats are faced with a big question mark as Senator Joe Manchin refuses to push the judgment on his political future. Manchin, who, along with Arizona's independent Senator Christine Sinema, often serves as a roadblock to leftist protocols in Congress, offered little insight on Sunday as he faced a flurry of questions regarding his plans, including possible presidential aspirations. "Let's see who is involved. Let's wait until we see who all of the players are," Manchin said